Thank you. So let's start today's conference day, and our first speaker is our Dennis Coelho, and he is current NES board chairman, as you know, is also active in other societies, including in the board of Mankind Project Nordic and as a co-director in Human Factor and Ergonomics Society Europe chapter. And his day job, which he loves, is as associate professor at the Department of Supply Chain and Operations Management in the School of Engineering, Jönköping University. And his keen interest is in interactions between people and technology that reside in the physical, cognitive, emotional, organizational, and even cultural levels. So, and today's theme is the proactive pursuit of system resilience by making sense of the dynamics of change. Dennis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. So this talk is meant essentially to spark some provocations in the audience. Let's see if if that happens. So I will go through a number of small provocations one by one. So here's the outline. Basically, what I'm trying to point at is the question: how do you anticipate the unexpected so you can be proactively resilient? And this, of course, in itself is a question that springs more from observation, from the actual living experience of these times, of the current decade in the 21st century, rather than a very substantial theoretical line backing up this line of inquiry. There is, however, some interesting topics and some interesting theories that, if we take an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, pluridisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach, which we do often in human factors and ergonomics, we might be able to piece together from different streams of theory an understanding that might be relevant for the kind of times and the situations that the current times are offering us. So without further ado, I will step into the first of these provocative slides, which is on system complexity. So for people who have been around since the 20th century, most of you maybe remember a time when systems used to be somewhat graspable, understandable. So as a mechanical engineer, that's my background. I take this car example, and I'm not even going to touch on the on the self-driving hopes, which never happened, but has been promised for more than a decade, self-driving cars. So this is not a self-driving prophecy, but it's rather a complexity example. So if we'll just look at the top image here, which shows a car which is pretty standard for the current times, there's an explosion of systems, of functions, and that basically is just complexity. So to sum this up, today's car is a multidimensional aggregation of multiple complex electromechanical functions. Each of these is a complex system in itself, and these functions must work closely and seamlessly with each other. And the driver doesn't see the details. These are all happening behind the scenes. And so this also triggers a new set of possible failure modes and potential opportunities for errors, mistakes. And typically, the classical engineering approach, even the classical business approach, is to place the blame on the human operator. So if you're in a car crash, oh, it's the driver's fault, human error. So nobody's really interested in looking at the possible complexity, overlooked simplifications that have opened the door for new kinds of failure modes. So the closed system approach, which has been prevalent in science and technology, is no longer relevant to deal with the kinds of systems that we as human beings have engineered. So we can no longer look at these complexity problems with a simplicity mindset. We can no longer look at this without considering the dynamics and the system complexity. So new paradigms of analysis are necessary, absolutely. So here comes one, which is basically a simple progression from the characteristics of simple systems, which our materialist, reductionist, still unfortunately prevalent paradigm is inviting us to look at. But what we see in practice is that not only have systems become not simple, but complicated, with increasing numbers of elements, modes, and relationships, but also gradually with more integration and more cross-functionality and shared platforms providing different functions. For example, in the car complexity example from the previous slide, the CAN, the car area network, is an information technology approach that is providing the backbone for all that functionality that we saw in the previous slide. So when we think of how complexity is basically biting our way of looking at the world, it's telling us we can no longer simplify. We have to embrace complexity. We might, as ergonomists in human factors, we might also take a look at what cognitive neuroscience is telling us these days. And it's not anything especially new. I think everybody's familiar with the concept of the split brain, the left and the right hemisphere, the left brain specializing on logics, linearity, and time, and the right side of the brain on emotions, feelings, and hunches. And of course, these the two brains are the two sides of the brains are crossed. So if we cover our right eye, then our left eye will bring in the sensory information, but that's actually being mirrored in the brain. So it's the right side of the brain that is processing the information coming in from the visual left side. So there is basically a lot in terms of neuroscience that is perhaps pointing at the fact that we can no longer overlook complexity also in the way we look at the world. So the complexity also springs from the way we are anatomically hardwired to process multiple streams of sensory stimuli. There's of course many frameworks that have popped up recently, and some of them aren't that new, but they're basically supporting an increasing realization that there's no turning away from complexity, and the linear materialist reductionist paradigms they are not amenable to deal with the problems that we are facing today. So this framework is from Stefan Grosser out of Bern in Switzerland, and he talks about complexity management and system dynamics thinking. So we can see to a growing complexity if we start from the lower right corner, and if we take a counterclockwise route in this pie diagram, we go from simple to complicated to complex to hyper complex, and we see the behavioral possibilities and the variable progression being increasing from stability to variability, from limited possibilities or modes the system might be in to an explosion. It's not a linear explosion, it's an exponential explosion of possibilities. And these possibilities bring about the need for embracing complexity and to actually look at problems from an open systems view rather than from a materialist reductionist paradigm, which is simply not able to deal with we don't even have to go to the hyper complexity. We just stay at the adaptive complex system, which most of our business and socioeconomic activities are between these two levels, either complex systems or hyper complex systems. And we're faced with many challenges these days, like with a constant call to manage organizational change, which is driven from the inside, so steer change, but also a more difficult call to respond to, which is responding to change that is coming from the outside. And this could be legislative change driven by government, or it could actually be environmental issues. And here I would like to make the distinction between disturbance and disruption, because a disturbance is typically something that is foreseen. You expect disturbances. You expect, for example, if you're in a production system, you expect that there will be sick days for some of the people in the organization, and that causes a disturbance. But you might also expect disruptions. I know that Iceland is expecting a volcanic eruption right now, but we don't know, and I don't mean to be extremely negative here, but we don't know if the disruption will come alone, or if there will be complicating factors. For example, we have seen that during the pandemic, where multiple disruptions interact and create failures and surprises that were simply not anticipated. Because again, the paradigms that are prevalent, they do not leave slack or leeway for dealing with the unforeseen, for anticipating the unexpected. So we basically, we're in a pickle. We need new ways to look at the world, and we need new cognitive lenses in order to deal with these kinds of problems, which basically we never dealt before since the Industrial Revolution. So these are increasingly complex and difficult, wicked problems, coupled with a lot of issues around the lack of environmental sustainability. So bottom line here, are we going to adopt a proactive or a reactive stance on dealing with the unexpected? And I'll just quickly provoke you a little bit more with this thought from 1961, Aldous Huxley, a British author, a novelist, thinker, controversial enlightened scholar for his time in the first half of the 20th century. So Aldous in 1961 asked the question, why do we want technology in the first place? And essentially, this is, of course, for people to reflect on. And he continues, he doesn't give an answer, but he gives a little more provocation by reminding us that technology was made for humanity. And humans were not made for technology. So this is perhaps the most important message. It comes from 1961. It's like 62 years old. And we're still fascinated by technology. We're still wondering, how do we become the best users of AI and all the new gadgets and all the stuff? But basically, are we in charge, or are we being transformed into a herd of obedient technology user? So that's a provocation I would leave here from Aldous Huxley, and I'll go on to a contemporary scientist. And this is a human factor specialist, Stephan Guastello, from the United States. And Stephan is a very prolific author in human factors and ergonomics. Like he puts out textbooks in human factors engineering and ergonomics. But he's also a prolific systems thinker, and particularly in approaching the nonlinear dynamical systems. And in this example, which is shown here, this is a catastrophe model for discontinuous change of events, and it's non-linear, but it's modeled mathematically. So it's a differential equation that you can see here. And basically, the whole idea behind nonlinear dynamical systems theory is that there are attractors which will gather stable states of behavior, but there are also other factors playing out in any environment, in any system, which can be conceptually considered as asymmetry factors or bifurcation factors, which are essentially patterns of instability, which, unlike the linear paradigms, these models enable modeling sudden changes in an event, stable to unstable situations where there's phase transitions and chaotic behavior when the stabilization is not taken into account. So rather than take you through a complicated dive into Stephan Guastello's multiple models, I'll just leave you with this hint that yes, it's possible to model, it's possible to simulate, it's possible to use the tools that have been around, computational tools, to predict system behavior from a non-linear paradigm, from a complexity paradigm. However, there's always, a fundamental fallacy in any technology development, is that if we look at past data, we are able to predict everything in the future. We're obviously, this is being proven as wrong every single time. Every single time there's an accident, every single time there's a major disruption, and we have people telling us that the problem was the human. Basically, and I'll just give you a small example recently that surprised me in a research seminar where master students were presenting their ideas for their research thesis. I was basically pleasantly surprised when a student proposed this hypothesis to develop in his master's thesis. His hypothesis was that the major supply chain disruptions that happened during the recent years, during the COVID pandemic, were not caused directly by the pandemic, but they were a side effect of the so-called automatic decision-making systems, artificial intelligence, of being running and making decisions automatically. These supply chains sending orders back and forth in the supply chain, creating these bullwhip effects. And so that, I think, is the new paradigm. It's rather than hoping that technology will solve all our problems, but rather making sure that we don't give technology tasks that it is not able to do better than humans. In the backdrop, and I would like to ask my session chair, how are we doing on time? I'm about halfway through my slide deck. Can I get a...
You have 8 minutes left.
Yes.
How many minutes?
8 minutes. Yeah.
8 minutes, so I have to speed up. Okay, let's go. Change management is a way, it's been around for many years in organizations, but the kind of change management that is being sold and that is being implemented is essentially, it's tied with the materialistic reductionist thinking, that we can change things and that they will be stable and that the environment will not destabilize because we have total control of what's going on. That's not the case, and everybody feels it. If you don't know it, you feel it, that we have an uncertain future and we need to cope with it, but not with the ways that we have been doing it for the last half century. There are some good news. There are some bright, intelligent people, for example, Erik Hollnagel, who have been thinking about these problems, anticipating before these major disruptions that we are now experiencing. So I think I don't have time to go through the details of Erik Hollnagel's thinking in terms of dealing with change management in a dynamic way, but I'll just leave out this hint that it's more about sailing by the wind rather than going through a very tight set of constraints in a plan. So rather than having a perfect plan, it's about changing the plan as you go in order to adapt to the conditions that are prevalent at any moment, which might not be the ones that the plan had foreseen. In a recent research study conducted here in Jönköping with some of my colleagues, we used part of Hollnagel's scholarly contributions to understand what's going on in manufacturing and operations resilience. And we were able to identify, based on the activities that are carried out in assembly operations, we were able to link Hollnagel's theory in terms of how to maintain a cycle for continuous improvement, which contributes to added resilience through these 4 activities at the situated level, while at the same time coordinating these activities, these cycles of monitoring, anticipating, learning, and responding at the basic fundamental value-added activities in the organization, and how these are supported by the structural and the systemic levels in the organization. So I don't have time for more details, but this research is published in Applied Ergonomics and it's open access. And that's all the time for this slide. So let's let's go to the next one, and I'll bring you back to the making sense of the complexity approach. And this time I'm not putting a mathematical model on the slide, because there is no mathematics behind this model. This is the knevin model by David Snowden. Knevin is a Welsh word meaning habitat, haunt, acquainted, or familiar. And David Snowden used this term in 1999 to refer to the idea that we all have connections, such as tribal, religious, and geographical, of which we may not be aware. Interestingly, former Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld, without giving any reference to Snowden, he basically paraphrased this model in this famous quote. There are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. And so you see we're going from the lower right corner of the model. Are we going anti-clockwise, counterclockwise, from obvious to complicated? We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. And now we're in the complex quadrant in the Knevin model. The ones we don't know, we don't know. Interestingly, Donald Rumsfeld stopped there, but there's two more areas in the Knevin model, which he didn't even touch upon in his public speech, which are the unknowable unknowns and the disorder. So the chaos and the disorder, which unfortunately, this is where many of the complex disruptions, multiple interacting disruptions, are placing us in these quadrants that we're not prepared from our materialist reductionist stance. We're not prepared to deal with this. But fortunately, there are some people who have been thinking about these issues for many years. And one of them is David Woods, which, by the way, was a PhD student from Erik Hollnagel, if you don't know.
Dennis,
Yes.
Quick comment, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay. So I'm just going to create a little relationship between the 4 concepts of resilience and the Knevin framework. So you can see them match. Simple matches with rebound, complicated matches with robustness, graceful extensibility matches with complex, and sustained adaptability matches with chaotic. Now, you will notice that there is nothing matching the center of the Knevin framework. There's no disorder. So to wrap this up, how do you anticipate the unexpected? We don't have time. I guess this will force me to to release the slides for sure. We don't have time to go through this, but essentially, it's a call for wisdom beyond AI, valuing the human abilities, those unknown unknowables, which are hiding in human genius. That's the way I think we need to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. That was very, very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Could you stop the recording, because I can't do that